Good afternoon, everyone. Today, the Adams Seminar has the great pleasure of welcoming Dr. Daniel Bahamon Garcia. Dr. Bahamon obtained his bachelor's and master's in chemical engineering from the Universidad Pontificia Bolivariana in Medellin, Colombia, and his Ph.D. in environmental science and technologies from the Autonomous University of Barcelona under the supervision of Professor Lourdes Vega. He has worked as a researcher at MatGas Research Center in Barcelona, Center of Excellence on CO2 and Sustainability, and as a postdoctoral researcher at the Institute in Computational Chemistry of the University of Barcelona. He's currently a senior research scientist at the Research and Innovation Center for Graphene and 2D Materials and at the Research and Innovation Center on CO2 and Hydrogen at Khalifa University. His research focuses on the design and evaluation of novel 2D materials and 3D porous materials through DFT molecular simulation and multi-scale techniques for application on gas adsorption, catalysis, separation processes focused on CO2, hydrogen, and water. Once again, thank you so much, Dr. Garcia, for being here with us, and please feel free to start your presentation.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much, Arthur, for the very nice introduction, and welcome everyone to this seminar. It's a pleasure for me to be here presenting what I've been doing for the past 6 years, maybe, after my PhD, when I joined Khalifa University. As Arthur mentioned, this seminar will be devoted to molecular simulations in order to find some materials, carbon-based materials for to be used as absorbents or membranes for sustainable processes. My seminar will be, the outline will be very brief. Basically, I will present some introduction on where I work, what is my background, and then I will move for two different topics. The first one will be carbon-based materials for CO2 capture, and the second one, another carbon-based materials, but in this case as membranes for water treatment, and some final remarks if I have time during my 40 minutes. So let's start by mentioning where I am right now. So Khalifa University is located in the United Arab Emirates, specifically in the Abu Dhabi Emirate. This is the capital. Abu Dhabi is the capital of the United Arab Emirates, or UAE. The most known city is Dubai, of course, is the most touristic one, but the governmental power and basically the oil reserves are in Abu Dhabi. Of course, it is a very modern city. You might think that because we are surrounded by desert, maybe the city is also desertic, but no, actually it's a very green city, and it's quite nice. But unfortunately now during the summer, of course, the temperatures are rising right now, 45 degrees. So I don't recommend to come during this period, during the summertime. But for the rest of the year, it's a very beautiful city and nice experience. More specifically, I'm working at Khalifa University as Arthur mentioned, in the Research and Innovation Center on CO2 and Hydrogen, called the RICH Center. And this center is devoted to, as the name says, for exploring either materials processes for either CO2 capture, utilization, also hydrogen production and storage, distribution. And we are adding additional work packages now as sustainable fuels. Right now, the research center comprises more than 23 faculty. We are talking about more than 70 postdocs. And of course, we also have collaborations with some industrial partners. I would like to mention also that recently I joined also another research center here in Khalifa University, which is more devoted to graphene and 2D materials. But as you might see, the type of projects or theme projects in where they are, basically the research is taking place, are very much interconnected, because we have energy, of course, in this case we have water and some other technologies. Now, this seminar will be devoted to carbon-based materials, of course. Just to mention that there are many variations or different types of carbon-based materials you might find in nature, or even hypothetical. So we can talk about from the very well-known graphite or graphene up to graphene oxide, carbon nanotubes. You can also have activated carbons and some other carbon foams. And depending on how the structure is ordered, you can have some crystalline structures or some other amorphous materials that maybe you can fine tune the structural properties in order to find some or to enhance the performance in a specific process. And the idea with all these simulations is just to combine the information or the understanding we can obtain from the molecular simulation with the information also we can get from the experiments, and try to move forward this into the process design, no? Into a more higher TRL and try to get these materials into the market. So I will start first with the first topic, which is related to carbon-based materials or absorbents for CO2 capture. So as we all know, in recent years, so of course the CO2 amount in the atmosphere is increasing almost exponentially. We know that we need to reduce this amount of emitting contaminant gases in order to avoid the global warming that is now taking place in our planet. But not all of them are bad news. Actually, CO2 is also beneficial because it's used in many industrial. It has many industrial uses, as for extracting oil. It can be used as supercritical CO2 for extracting another very valuable molecules. It can also be used in the food industry, in the soda industry, of course, in the extinguishers. There are many uses. If you need more details, so maybe you can take a look up at the recent paper we published in ACS Sustainable Chemistry Engineering, in where we show what are the perspectives of this CO2 capture for conversion and use in the different markets. As I was mentioning, yes. So right now so I'm showing here basically the amount of CO2 that is emitted every year in terms of gigatons of CO2. And basically we are right now in the green line. And of course there are some policies in order to try to reduce or try to reduce, let's say, the amount that is emitted every year. Of course, we have the Paris Agreement. And we're talking about the COP28 that took place last year here in Abu Dhabi. The idea is to get net zero strategies in the different countries, in the different industrial countries. And among the different areas in where you can start reducing or this CO2 emitted is basically by having energy efficiency, using renewables, of course, electrification. In my case, I'm more focused on CO2 capture or in storage, and also on hydrogen. Now, how can we capture this CO2? There are many strategies, many technologies that are available in the market that we can use, like by using cryogenics. Of course, you can use biological methods. You can also use membranes in this case. But the most mature technology right now is the absorption by using amines. Of course, these amines, they are right now the benchmark, but still they have some limitations, as like the desorption requires great amount of energy, because basically these amines are in the aqueous phase. Of course, there are also some losses due to this evaporation, and you can degrade these amines due to the oxygenated compounds you have in the flue gas when you are capturing the CO2. That's why we are basically trying to use an alternative, which is basically absorption. In this case, the potential is towards reducing the cost up to 30% by using these solid materials, porous solid materials. And making use of these swing absorption cycles, we can have like an advance in a more dynamic production, and maybe for specific facilities in where you don't have a continuous amount of CO2 being emitted to the atmosphere. Now, if we talk about the different, or let's say the wishing list for this type of materials, they should be at least as good as the amines, of course, but they should be also easier to regenerate, suitable for a wide range of conditions, of course, stable, and more importantly, maybe cost affordable in order to get into the market in a few years. Just to take note here, the important parameters, basically the capacity you should get, or you should capture more than 2 millimoles of CO2 per gram of absorbent. The selectivity with respect to other gases should be above 100. Of course, stability, and as I was mentioning before, the cost. I would like to mention here that no reported absorbents have satisfied this ambitious criteria right now, but still there are progress on new materials or new absorbents, mostly hybrid absorbents, to overcome these limitations. For this specific seminar, the motivation, of course, is this: why not using these activated carbons? Because they have been used in other applications for gases, for fluids, because they have a very high surface area, they are well developed, they have functional groups that maybe we can improve the performance of these materials. And of course, usually what you find in the literature, if you go for absorption isotherms or for capacities, is based on pure components, not usually for mixtures or for the real conditions you have in the process. And of course, you can get additional features from the molecular simulations perspective. So the idea is to evaluate these molecular simulations, the competitive absorption of these gases which are present in industrial streams like carbon dioxide, nitrogen, mostly. We'll explain basically these two gases for the moment, and to compare the capacities depending on the characteristics. For the methodology is clear, no? So since we are using absorption, we will use grand canonical Monte Carlo simulations. Of course, we will need the crystallographic or structural information of our materials, a force field to calculate the interactions between the different atom types we have in our simulation, and a software to run them. Properties that we can obtain from the GCMC, Grand Canonical Monte Carlo, basically absorption isotherms, absorption at different pressures at the same temperature, a detailed picture of the on the molecular level, or what is happening inside the material, isosteric heats, which are related to the interaction between the molecules and the surface itself. And you can move forward and check this also for multi-component mixtures and evaluate selectivities and other properties. Importantly here is to mention that this information from molecular simulations perspective can be combined with process simulation or thermodynamic calculated properties, just to evaluate in an easier way, but a simplistic but very powerful way, how this information can be related to the process modeling. So we can talk about key performance indicators in where we can obtain working capacities, which is basically the information related to the absorption and desorption conditions. If you have also the regeneration energy, which is also related to the amount of CO2 that you are recovering from material, the purity, the regenerability in case you want to use it in multiple cycles, and so on. Now, as I was mentioning, so the idea is to use carbon-based materials, activated carbons, of course. There is another family that I will introduce in a few slides, which are called zeolated templated carbons. And the idea is not only to explore the materials as they are right now, but try to add additional features in these materials, like having hierarchical structures. That means having not only micropores, but mesopores in the structure to see what is the influence on the absorption capacity. And also what is the influence on functionalizing this material in the overall CO2 capture performance. Starting with the activated carbon, of course, these are not crystalline, these are amorphous materials. They have been modeled in different manners in the literature. In our case, we follow this methodology. Basically, we use an array of disordered and functionalized curved sheets, graphene oxide sheets, with polar groups and some defects in order to match or to agree with the ranges reported for the surface area, the pore volumes, and of course the experimental carbon to oxygen ratio and some other experimental properties you can measure, trying to get what experimentally have been synthesized. In this case, in this case, we have been able to develop an activated carbon model for a material that was synthesized in our lab based on date sheets. Now, for the other family I was mentioning before, we have zeolated templated carbons. As the name says, basically they are basically you will use a zeolite as a sacrificial template, and after loading some carbon inside the material and using some treatment with fluoridic acid, basically you will have like the negative part of the zeolite, which will also have some additional features or additional properties that can be beneficial for CO2 capture, especially in the micropores. Some of the studied structures are shown here. In black, you might see the zeolated templated carbon, and with transparency, you might see the original zeolite, the crystallographic information of the zeolite. So you might see that basically you are getting the negative part of the zeolites, and you might see that, of course, you don't only have micropores in some cases, but also some, let's say not mesopores, but larger micropores that are in the original zeolite. Okay, so as I mentioned before, so these are Monte Carlo simulations. Now for the force field, basically we need to capture the different interactions between the molecules on the surface. The molecules in this case, CO2 and nitrogen, they were modeled using the TRAPPIST force field. And for the structures, we will use the OPLS potential model, just making a small modification in the epsilon parameter for the carbon atoms to adjust the curvature on the structures, because this model was based on flat carbon surfaces. And some additional details on the simulations are shown here on the bottom of the slide. You might see a cutoff radius, the number of steps, and so on. Now let's focus on the results. The results, I'm showing results in two different manners for this topic. The first one will be devoted to the comparison of the materials. And then the second one will be like some strategies we can follow trying to enhance the performance of these materials. Yes, so let's start with the first approach. Of course, initially, the idea is to validate your results to make sure that what you are getting from the simulations makes sense, and you can further use this information you are obtaining to extrapolate it for different conditions, not for additional conditions you cannot obtain experimentally. I'm showing here on the left-hand side the validation of this activated carbon. As you might see, there is a good agreement. Of course, we elaborated hundreds of possible activated carbon models. This was the best, well, the best model that matches the experimental results. So we use that one. Now, with respect to the zeolated templated carbons, you might see here some validation for two specific zeolate templated carbons, the faugasite and the MNT. You might see also a very good agreement, especially at low pressures. When you go to higher pressures, there is a slight deviation, most probably due to the synthesis of the CTCs. Now, in order to explore the different ZTCs available, so since the list of zeolated reported in literature is more than 30, so what we did was basically to explore the whole range and select some specific materials, some specific structures, trying to cover the whole range for between pore volumes and surface areas. So the ones we selected are in different color now, not in yellow, the other colors. So basically, the idea is to explore what is the influence of the different porosities, different surface areas we have in our structures, to see what is the influence on the CO2 capture. And these are the initial results. So for pure CO2, at a condition of 330 Kelvin, which is around 40 degrees, which is the temperature you might get at industrial conditions for post-combustion. These are the absorption isotherms of the different materials. You might see the different ceolated templated carbons as CTC and the other name, and I'm comparing also the activated carbon. As you might see, there are some materials, especially the ones with a higher pore volume or surface area, which are showing not a very good, affinity at lower pressures. But then when you go to higher pressures, of course, they will outperform some of them, and you might see that they are not saturated at the pressure range I'm showing. And of course, there are some other materials like BOG or AFG, which are basically in the lower range in our list, which are basically fully saturated at very low pressures. Let's say 400 kilopascals. They are already saturated, but they show a very good affinity, especially in their low pressure range. So this might be beneficial for capturing CO2 at low concentrations. You might see this in a few slides as well. Now, after having the information of the, let's say, parent structures, now the idea is to explore what was the influence of having these hierarchical features in our material, not only the micro, but the mesopore as well. And as you might see here on the right-hand side, basically having these mesopores is increasing the capacity of the material, but let's say the capture capacity in the low pressure range is basically the same. With adding these mesopores, what you are adding is basically more space, capture more CO2, but especially or for very high pressures. So maybe it won't be beneficial for the type of application I'm showing to you today. And of course, the benefits of having these molecular simulations is that you can see how the molecules are located in the different pores. So you can get these snapshots. I'm showing here two examples for this structure, this faugesite. So at the very beginning, at very low pressures, CO2 will prefer to be absorbed in the very small pores in these pockets. And then after you basically almost saturate these all micropores, the CO2 will start being absorbed in the higher or mesopore we created. So yes, so this is confirming what I was mentioning before. Now, all the information I showed before was based on pure components. Now, what is the influence of when you have binary mixtures, let's say? So I'm showing here this is called selectivity, which is based on the affinity ratio between the absorption for CO2 and absorption for nitrogen at different concentrations, 500 ppm, which is basically which can be related to CO2 concentration in the atmosphere right now in the air, and two additional concentrations, 5, 15, and 25, which are more related to post-combustion in different processes, either by natural gas, carbon, coal, or additional feedstocks. As you might see, the selectivity is very consistent or very similar as a function of the concentration. So you might get very similar selectivities along the different concentrations. But importantly here is to mention that there is actually no, let's say there is no like a big modification when you add the hierarchical structures in the selectivity. So you can maintain the selectivity of your material when you add this mesopore. And also to mention here that, of course, the materials showing the highest or the higher selectivity are basically the ones that I showed before that were showing a higher big, or let's say higher slopes at very low pressure. So the materials with the lower pore volume and surface area were showing the highest selectivity in our case. And we were able also to correlate this selectivity also with the isosteric heat, or let's say which is also related to the Henry's constant, the slope at very low pressures. And you might see that, of course, as you increase the isosteric, or as the isosteric is increased, or the affinity, the interaction between the CO2 and the material is increased, also the selectivity in our material. Now, before I move, so as I mentioned during the motivation, remember that so we're trying to get a criteria in where the selectivity should be at least higher than 100, no? So as you see here, most of these structures are showing selectivities of around 20, 16, very low selectivities for CO2 capture and separation, no? So the idea is to start improving this by adding some other additional features in the system. Like, for instance, adding some functionalization or hybridization of these carbon-based materials with some other well-known materials from the literature. I'll focus right now on the functionalization part. The idea is basically to use some amines, try to graph them on the surface of the created pores, and make use of an explicit reaction that is taking place between the different oxygenated groups from the this is in case activated carbon and the amine, to generate some amide formation. And then after having this, explicitly including the reaction of the CO2 with the other amine in order to form some carbamates associated to the reaction. So we are assuming that at a specific pressure, at very low pressure, the CO2 will be absorbed and will react with this amine and will form this carbamate. So most probably half of the amines we have in our system will be fully chemisorbed with this CO2. For the results, so this is very interesting. I'm showing here the initial information of for instance, for fungicide. As I told you before, there is no much interaction at very low pressures. You might see that mostly you can get, let's say, 2 millimoles per gram at a pressure of 1 bar or 100 kilopascals, which is not that much. But when you functionalize this material and you assume this chemisorption state, you can enhance the performance at very low pressures, and you can increase from, let's say, 0.2 up to 8 millimoles per gram this capacity. And of course, depending on the type of amine you might have, or the geometry of your pore, you can further enhance this. Like, for instance, the difference between having a parent structure with the hierarchical one, which is in dashed lines, is based on absorptions, not in this case at very high pressures, but let's say mid-range pressures. So you might see an enhancement when you go from 50 to 100 kilopascals of around 2 millimoles per gram, which is quite a lot for these materials. And as I was mentioning, depending on the type of structure you use, either the fungicide or the activated carbon, you might have different slopes, different isotherm shapes. But overall, you need to relate this to the process model in order to see which one might be more beneficial for your specific application. And this is what we did after. So first, I'm showing here now the selectivities in this case, comparing the initial structures before functionalization and after functionalization. You might see now that we are now getting the criteria we were expecting, obtaining selectivities above 100 in this case. And the same, the working capacities for the amount of CO2 that I can capture and regenerate in my process is also being more than the expected criteria we had at the very beginning. Now for the process, so we can have many different, let's call them key performance indicators, or to see which one will be more beneficial for another one. I'm showing here two key performance indicators, KPIs, chart working capacity and energy requirement. As you might see, by having this functionalization, basically you are not only increasing the working capacity, the amount of CO2 that you can actually recover from your system, and you're reducing also the energy requirements, because you are recovering more CO2 per cycle. And of course, the selectivity is being enhanced as well. So another thing that you can do is, by using these parameters, you can calculate, or you can use contour plots or these maps to check what are the most optimum conditions for each one of the specific materials we have evaluated. In this case, I'm showing an example of this material which have shown very promising results for CO2 capture. You might see that having only the structure without functionalization, actually you might not get too much working capacity, around 1.5, which is not a lot. The best range will be in this area. Now, but when you functionalize this, of course you are enhancing this. The absorption isotherms, the capacity is enhanced at lower pressure, so you can go up to 2.5 millimoles per gram, and this criteria is more than good for absorption in this case. I'm showing here very briefly another strategy you can follow. Instead of having functionalization of your materials, you can have, let's say, something called hybridization, in where you can use materials like metal organic frameworks, which are known to have a very good CO2 capacity or affinity, but you know that they are not very stable. So you can improve the mechanical properties with by having a combination of this material with some carbonaceous material, like for instance graphene oxides, in order to form these hybrid structures and try to get a synergistic effect on the performance. These are the validations done. They were made by Dr. Hongyu Zhao. He got his PhD last year, and this is part of his work. Basically, he did the comparison, the validation, comparing the experimental values with, let's say, field symbols, and the simulations with open symbols and with the line. You might see a very good agreement. And then he explored what was the influence of having different amounts of graphene oxide in the performance. And of course, there was a moment in where you just reach a plateau, but of course, is the amount that is absorbed when compared to the original structure is more than, in this case, let's say 50, 20, 80% of the capacity. And by having this, of course, you are also improving the selectivity. You are also improving or reducing the energy requirements. And this is mostly due to the creation of these additional regions, absorption regions, in between the two materials. These are not chemisorbed as in the previous example, where I showed basically amines grafted to the surface. In this case, we have two materials. They are interacting and being physisorbed one on the other, and creating these additional pores, which are beneficial in this case for CO2 capture. So with this, I will finalize this topic, and take-home messages from now. We have used this GCMC with some thermodynamic microscopic parameters to determine some key performance indicator, like these working capacities, energy requirements, for use them in swing absorption processes, and to check which materials can be beneficial for this application. In specific, so we have found that these CTZs with mid-size pore volumes and surface area like IRR are more suitable for CO2 capture. Importantly here is to mention that the functionalization, of course, can enhance the absorption capacity and the selectivity. But for this, I would recommend to use mesopores or hierarchical materials to allow the amines have some free space to move and also have space to absorb the upcoming CO2. And only the hierarchical structure of these mesopores without functionalization can be further explored for other additional applications, like for instance, using them for syngas streams in where you already have a stream with a very high pressure. So you can make use of them to capture some CO2 or some additional molecules like methane and so on. And of course, there is still work needed to find these best absorbents, but these promising materials, of course, there are not only these ones, but some other ones are also in their development. So it's expecting to see more advances in this topic in the recent years. So now the idea is to start exploring now what is the effect of impurities, which I didn't mention before, to see what will happen if these materials are also exposed not only to CO2 and nitrogen, but water or SO2 or additional impurities you might get in the combustion stream. Let's move on now and check the second topic. The second topic is more related to membranes, to use these carbon-based structures like graphene oxide membranes for water treatment. Water treatment in terms of, so let's start first by mentioning, of course, I'm in the Middle East right now, so it's very important. It's a hot topic right now to find ways to try to get secure water for everyone in this region, which is expected to be worsening in the future now with the climate change and the things that are happening in the world. There are many strategies to try to treat this wastewater. Of course, you can use, in case you want to use desalination, you can use heat, of course, to get some pure water, or you can use absorption as before, as I showed, absorbent materials. You can use them to capture some ions or some unwanted species, and you might get pure water as the outcome, or you can also use membranes. Membranes, of course, are the most used. Of course, for using reverse osmosis is the most typical process. The idea is there are well-known membranes for this, of course, like polymer-based. But if we can try to enhance some properties and also reduce the cost of these materials by using some less expensive materials, it will be also beneficial. Now, why are we talking about these carbon-based membranes? Because you can make use on some specific features, like for instance, using graphene oxide, which is cost energy efficient. It has very good characteristic, is stable, and it might be helpful for filtering ions and molecules with high precision if you can actually tune the intercalated space between the layers. As I mentioned, for the absorbents, now the wishing list for these membranes, of course, is stability. You might get a good permeability as well. You need selectivity with respect to other molecules or ions, and you might have say the right nanochannels to be able to control the transport of the different species through these membranes. No. So I didn't mention this before, but let me explain here that this is a long-term project we started with not only with Khalifa University, but in collaboration with the University of, it's called KAIST in Korea, in South Korea, with Professor Eunson Cho and her team. Basically, the idea was to do some research by using not only simulations, but experiments and simulation, trying to get some new materials or new membranes for water treatment. As I mentioned, the synthesis and fabrication was performed or was done in Korea, and so we focus on the molecular simulation part. So the idea was trying to understand what was happening at the molecular level and try to see the effect of different parameters in the simulation, like evaluating the interlayer spacing, the intercalation of different molecules or species in the system, and of course evaluating permeation and rejection of at process conditions. What I'm planning to show in maybe 10 minutes right now, just to finish, are 3 examples basically. The first one will be devoted to the use of multi-layer graphene oxide for removal of some pharmaceuticals, some pollutants you might get in water. And the second and third one will be devoted to, of course, also graphene oxide membranes, but in this case, intercalating additional molecules, trying to control the interlayer spacing of this graphene oxide. Starting with the first one, the idea was to explore what was the influence of having different layers and different oxygenated groups or concentrations on the graphene oxide surface to see what was the influence on capturing different molecules like phenol and ibuprofen. And so the idea was so basically the model comprises this type of simulation. In this case, not Monte Carlo, we are performing right now molecular dynamics. In this case, in the non-equilibrium molecular dynamics, because basically we are applying a piston to the feed region to try to move the molecules through the different channels that were created on the membrane, and to get them in the permeate region. As some of the results shown, basically you might see that of course there will be some water absorbed on the surface of the membrane, but due to the different layers that water is forming in between the layers, you might get an enhancement in the water flowing through the membrane. And you can also check or explore what is the influence, or what, due to the radial distribution functions, you might see what is the interaction between the different oxygenated groups and the different species. Like for instance, in this case, I don't think it's too clear, but actually the graphene oxide with the highest oxygen content will have a higher interaction with the different species, with different molecules. And another results are related to the water permeation, number of molecules, water molecules that are passing through the system with time. Of course, as you increase the number of layers, you are reducing the number of molecules that will pass, because they need more time to pass the different layers. You might also relate this with the water flow, if you like, or you can also relate it to the rejection of the different unwanted species. Importantly here is that we found some materials, not only with 4, but also with only 1 layer, able to capturing or be able to reject these unwanted species, like ibuprofen in this case. But of course, this simulation, they have so many assumptions, like for instance, the membrane was rigid, but the carbon atoms from the membrane were rigid. So we don't see this swelling effect with this graphene oxide. So in order to before showing that, I will also like to mention that we not only did this for graphene oxide membranes, but also for activated carbons. If you are interested, there are some very useful papers we published a few years ago related to this topic. So as I was mentioning, so we didn't see this swelling effect in this initial membrane. So the idea is to check this effect by having not only the graphene oxide itself, but additional molecules in between, to see if we can maintain the interlayer distance of the graphene oxide. So for that, we have followed 2 strategies. The first one was intercalating some crown ethers, and due to the electrostatic interaction between this crown ether and the ion that is in between, which is potassium, they can hold these graphene oxide layers very tightly, and we can obtain these channels with a specific distance that will be beneficial for the water permeation. Since I was mentioning that this is a collaboration with some experimental We will have also some experimental results. I will go a little bit fast with the experimental results, basically just to mention that as we increase the number of intercalated crown ethers in the system, the surface is smoother. And of course, the thickness is higher, but the interlayer distance can be maintained with the addition of these crown ethers. With regards to the molecular simulations, so initially we just evaluated what was the swelling effect on having graphene oxide only in a cubic box with water and some ions. And as you can see from the plots, it's clear that you have this swelling effect when you use molecular dynamics in the MPT ensemble. Some specific conditions that I'm showing here. And importantly here is just to mention that, let's move to the next one. Yes. We were able to maintain the interlayer spacing after intercalating these crown ethers in between the layers. And actually it was very similar as having not only graphene oxide by the graphene oxide in water without the swelling effect. So we can actually maintain the interlayer distance by holding these layers with these crown ethers and allowing also the ions to be retained closer to these crown ethers. So we related this information also with the experimental setup, and we found that yes, actually increasing the amount of these crown ethers is beneficial. Yes, for the rejection. For the rejection, basically you are increasing the columns. You will increase the rejection. You might get 70% of, in this case, salt rejection, but it is a trade-off because you will lose also permeance. You will lose the capacity of the membrane to allow water to pass through, because basically you are blocking these channels with the crown ethers you are intercalating. So there is still work in progress that we need to make in this sense to find the most promising one for this application. And the last one is related to basically the same water desalination, intercalating, in this case, not only crown ethers, but something different, polymers in this case. Instead of making use of the electrostatic interactions between the molecules and the graphene oxide, we are chemically bonding these polymers with the graphene oxide and forming some hybrid structures. The idea is basically to intercalate these polymers called polyethylamine and polyacrylic acid, just forming an amide bond between the two polymers, and being able to, let's say, to maintain the interlayer distance by applying specific pressure in the system. Because as you pressurize your system, basically you are forcing the polymers to be, let's say, more linear in between the layers and not forming this type of, let's say, micelles that will increase for sure the interlayer distance, and of course the rejection will be much lower. The same here is experimental plus simulation on the simulation side. Of course, beside the graphene oxide, we model the two polymers. You might see here some examples on the initial and, let's say, an equilibrated state of the simulation, where you might see that you can actually maintain the interlayer distance and after applying the specific pressures. On the experimental side, they might get they got basically these results that, as you introduce these polymers, you are increasing the interlayer spacing from, let's say, to 10 to 12. But by applying this pressure, you might reduce this distance. So we did the same with our simulations, and we found a very good agreement. As you might see, if we compare the blue boxes and the green boxes, the simulations are quite consistent with what it was found experimentally. Of course, they are not exactly agree. They don't exactly agree with the simulations, with the experiments, because we didn't include the reaction taking place between the two polymers. But overall, it's a good is a good comparison. And of course, I'm only showing here these examples, but there are more results on the published paper. And of course, not only molecular simulations, but we also did some DFT calculations to evaluate what was the interaction between the different ions and the polymer, and what was the benefits of having these intercalated polymers. With that, I would like to finish and just mentioning these take-home messages for this topic. Of course, so we have followed this strategy, experimental pro-simulation for this, say, hybrid graphene oxide sheets, membranes. The comparison is quite consistent with respect to what was reported experimentally. In specific for the case study where we were adding the ethers, the crown ethers, there is still a compromise between the permeability and the separation. So we need to further explore this. And now with respect to this polymer intercalation, we were able to maintain the water flux and a good salt reduction of salt being permeating through this membrane. Additional simulations will be performed after for evaluating also this permeation, not only on the experimental side, but also on the simulation side. And I would like to finish with this final conclusion, which mentions that these molecular models, not only for the membrane, but also for the absorbents, are sufficiently flexible so you can tune the different parameters like oxygenated groups, surface area will require, and some other features to gather. You can do it in a systematic way to introduce or to reflect the specific properties of the system you might have experimentally. And with this, you can try to understand what is happening and also go a little bit further and improve the performance of what you have so far, let's say experimentally, or what is the materials that are showing the best performance so far. Also we like to mention that these materials cannot only be used for membranes for water treatment and for as absorbents for CO2. You can also use them. Let's say I'm showing here two examples in where we are working right now. Like we are using these zeolite templated carbons for steam methane reforming. We are checking how this membrane can trap CO2 and allow hydrogen to pass through, and also using the additional hierarchical materials for lithium-air batteries. There are two PhD students working on this right now. And with this, I would like to finalize and thank you all of you for your attention. Of course, the atoms, all the students that were in contact with me, and thank you so much. If you have any question, please feel free.